Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. Jeff Chadiha is one of the most recognizable people in the world of sports journalism, currently at his role at the NFL Network. His winning smile and outgoing personality seems tailor-made for television, but he really was brought up in the world of print journalism. He has worked at some of the most prestigious journalistic outlets, and he has worked at them when they were at the heights of their powers. Sports Illustrated starting in 2000, ESPN starting in 2007. But his journey to that journalistic career is a very interesting one and a very diverse one. He was raised in a big college town in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the son of a dentist and an educator, was a fine athlete as a youngster, and eventually became a scholarship football player, but only after some trials and tribulations and fighting through some injuries that would eventually end his playing career. He always had an affection for writing, and he would eventually turn that into a career. And the story of all that, the fascinating journey of Jeff Chadiha, is what we bring you today on Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. It was an absolute blast to talk to Jeff. He's an engaging personality. He's got one of the most infectious smiles, as they said, that you'll ever see. And he certainly looks like what he was, a football player in tremendous physical condition to this day. We talked to him right after he played some pickup basketball, and we'll have that conversation coming up for you next, right here. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters.
Before you spend your time and money going after an MBA, ask yourself why. Is it so you can tell people you got your MBA? So you can add a line to your CV? So you can call it a CV instead of a resume? Truth is, any MBA will do that. On the other hand, if your goal is to learn how to successfully manage and grow a business with real-world insights from experienced professionals, well, consider getting your MBA from Park University. Our low student-to-teacher ratio gives you personalized attention, and our face-to-face and online classes offered in 8-week terms are designed with working professionals like you in mind. No wonder the Kansas City Business Journal ranks Park University as the top MBA program in the area. Classes begin June 10th at all 4 KC area locations: Parkville, Downtown, Independence, and Lenexa. Visit park.edu to get started.
Get a refreshing change of your expectations of a sports bar and restaurant at the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence. Matt Llewellyn's welcoming spot at Clinton Parkway and Castle covers all the bases, like their own handcrafted beers and all the televisions you need for great sports viewing. But it's the large, varied, and delicious menu that stands apart. From a favorite of mine like the awesome ahi tuna appetizer to great sandwiches, outstanding pizza, and truly fantastic entrees, the 23rd Street Brewery has it all. Matt and his friendly staff make it that much more enjoyable. Food until 10, fun until late. The 23rd Street Brewery is a can't-miss stop when you are in Lawrence. Jeff, you were born and grew up in a big college town with one of your parents, your mom, a professor, and your father, a dentist. So obviously a successful family. And just tell me what life was like for a guy, 70s child of the 70s?
Yes,
what was it like being a little boy in the 70s?
You know, it was fun. I had a little bit background on my parents. My mom is from, she was born in Alabama, a real small town in Alabama. She was part of a sharecropping family. And so she was the only kid in her family to go to college. She left home when she was 17, 18 years old, and made her way to Washington State University. Met my dad there. My dad came from Uganda. He left there to come here to go to school. Thought he'd go back. That didn't work out because Idi Amin took over the country.
Wow,
and
yeah.
So he was stuck here.
Right.
And so they made their way to Michigan. And so when I was growing up, both my parents were trying to, get advanced degrees and trying to make their way. And they were very independent people, obviously, not having a lot of family around. So I learned how to kind of fend for myself. I had a twin brother. And, I remember when we were in the first grade, it's funny now because I have a 6-year-old who's in the first grade, and I drive him to school. My ex-wife drives him to school. We took the bus. We had a key in our pocket. We came home from school. We went inside. We made our own food. Wait until they came home, and that was our life. So we kind of grew up learning how to be independent. But Ann Arbor was a very unique place to live, and I know your wife went to school there.
Right.
It's
huge school.
Yeah, huge school, very liberal, college community. And so we were always exposed to cool stuff. We were always around a lot of diversity. I had black friends, white friends, Asian friends. It was just, I look back on it now and I think of all the places I've been in this country, and it was a great place to grow up because we got to be ourselves. We got to run around, have fun. It was never a sense of divisions, of hatred, of danger. It was just a really wide open place for a kid.
We'll go back to this, but just to fast forward a bit, did that create any jarring moments later on in your life, in your adulthood, where maybe the atmosphere wasn't so accepting?
Not so much, because I went from there to Wyoming to play football. I know we'll talk about that later when I was in college, but I always felt like the world was wide open and people were very open-minded. And so I never had a sense of, I'm going to judge this person this way, or I'm going to have this view of this topic because, of whatever reason. I've always felt like you sit down and you listen to people, you give people a chance to talk about themselves and explain who they are, and you respect their experiences. So again, from a pretty early age, as I look back on it, I was just always exposed to that way of thinking.
As we tape this, you're just returning from playing some basketball. So obviously you played basketball. You obviously played football because you came in scholarship football. Did you play all sports?
I did. It was a different world back then in the 70s where you were encouraged to play everything. So I actually didn't play organized sports until I was 11. Again, my parents were really big on education. That's what really drove my mom to a better life. That's what my dad came here to get. And so they never talked about sports. They never talked about, my brother and I playing sports. We were big kids, but it was never the sense of like, oh, we got to get you into this program, or we got to get you involved with this because you're going to have a future doing this. It was always books, books, books. And so the first time I actually played sports, I signed up for a flag football team. Didn't know what I was doing. My mom said, you can play it. Just make sure you get to practice. And I was horrible at it, but I got through the year. I was in 4th grade. The next year I started to play on a basketball team, 5th grade basketball team. Couldn't make a layup. And so I look back on that again, and I feel like I'm glad they didn't force me to do anything, because I learned to fall in love with sports all by myself. I learned to appreciate working at sports all by myself, and I began to understand that if I was going to be good at this stuff, and I wanted to be good, I had to really own it. I had to really go out and sacrifice and compromise and make time for it. And I'll never forget, again, 5th grade basketball. A lot of guys could play basketball pretty well. I couldn't make a layup. That summer, I would get on my bike. I'd have to ride about a couple miles to get to the nearest basketball court, and I would do it at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I would just shoot baskets. I would shoot jump shots and take layups. And I don't know why I felt I should do that, but I wanted to be better. And the next year I was a pretty good basketball player, so I learned a pretty good lesson back then.
What was it like to be the son of a first-generation American who basically had planned not to be an American? He had planned to go back.
Well, my dad didn't talk a lot about his life over there, and it wasn't until I was in college that he really opened up about it. I remember being 10 and him leaving for a while, and didn't really explain where he was going. He just said he was going to be gone. And as it turns out, his dad was sick and he had to go back to see him. It was the first time Idi Amin had been overthrown and, booted out of the country, so it was safe for him to go back. But he was gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and he came back, never talked about it. And then my parents split up when I was in college. My mom moved to St. Louis to teach at Washington University. I had come back from Wyoming, and I was going to school at Michigan. I wound up living with my dad for a year. And one day he came in, and he was torn apart. He started crying, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, well, my dad just died. And I had never seen a picture of my grandfather, never heard him talk about him, never heard him mention his name. And he really went into detail about what his dad meant to him, how he took care of him. I guess his mother died when he was really young, so his dad really raised him on his own. And it was such an emotional moment. And I remember my dad saying, please don't let me die alone like that. I don't want to die like my dad died. I want you to be able to be there with me, because he just felt like his father did so much for him, and he couldn't thank him. He wasn't there to be there with him at the end. So I wish that he talked more about it, but he didn't. And so I didn't really learn a lot about my grandfather until, I was in my 30s and 40s when I started asking serious questions.
So we know that you weren't right off the bat a great athlete. When did you start to get to the point where, you felt like you were good and you were going to maybe have a somewhat of a future in it and as a scholarship athlete?
It's kind of funny you asked that, because I think I always felt like I was going to be great at it. I don't know why I felt that way, but I think my personality's always worked at something until I get good at it. And I'm not going to do something unless I can really excel at it. And so pretty much every sport I played, I learned a hard lesson, because I had to start out from the bottom. And so football, I sucked. Basketball, I sucked. First year I played baseball, I struck out every time I batted. First year, for a year and a half, I struck out. Wow. And I always tell, kids this when I talk to them, is that when I played baseball, I struck out every time for a year and a half. And I got up in a key moment in my last year as a 12-year-old playing Little League Baseball. And I had 2 men on, and it was a playoff situation. We had to win to get in. It was late in the game. We were losing, and I was up to bat. And I remember looking back on it thinking that I'm sure all my teammates thought we're going to lose this game, because this kid who's never hit the ball is up to bat. And I hit a double. In that moment, it was my first hit. And so ever since that point, I think I always felt like whatever I do, if I work hard enough at it, it's going to happen for me. And so when I started playing basketball, I got better pretty quickly. Baseball took off from there. I started to become an all-star player in that league. Once I got into high school, it became more apparent to me that there was potential, because all of a sudden, when my brother and I were in the 8th grade and, finishing up 8th grade, getting ready to go to high school, we took a tour of high schools. And all of a sudden, the local high school coach we were at was kind of driving around the neighborhoods and seeing where we were at and calling us over to the car and saying, hey, what are you doing? What's going on? We went to a couple of private schools, and all of a sudden the coaches are coming out and giving us their pitch. And I'm thinking, this probably didn't happen for every kid. we were big kids. We were probably, I was like 6'2" going to high school. My brother was 6'4". And so I think at that point I began to think, all right, well, if I continue to work at this, clearly I've got some size and I've got some potential in the eyes of these coaches, like something good can happen. And so I started focusing on basketball, but I actually started playing football when I was a sophomore in high school, just to kind of stay in shape, and didn't play a whole bunch. And then I ended up playing halfway through the season. I was a sophomore on the team, and I intercepted a pass and scored a touchdown. And then literally 2 months later, I got a letter from Indiana University in the mail saying, hey, do you want to, we heard about you. You're a prospect. You're on our list. Obviously, a lot of kids get those kind of letters. But for me, it was just that simple of I did something for a little bit. I got good at it, and then somebody noticed it.
What sport did you like the best?
I love basketball, and I still do love basketball the best. Like that, basketball was a sport that I spent the most time at. Where I grew up, it was a sport that everybody played. We were kind of in the shadow of Detroit and Ann Arbor, so a lot of you paid attention to the Pistons, you paid attention to Michigan basketball. A lot of high school kids in Detroit were big time players. I remember going to being in high school and going to see the state championship games at Chrysler Arena where Michigan plays, and I remember seeing Flint Northwestern in 1985, and they had Glenn Rice and Andre Rison and Anthony Pendleton, who was McDonald's All-American, and Jeff Grayer, who played at Iowa State. It was a phenomenal team. And I'm just sitting there watching these guys like, wow, it's amazing. Like, I want to do that. And so I still had that work ethic of getting up early, going in the gym, working at it. And then football showed up. And I had a football coach who was a great recruiter and a really good salesman. He really sat me down one day and explained to me that the numbers game. He said, look, there's 12 guys playing basketball. There's 85 guys on a football team. Mm-hmm. If you want to be playing something in college, this is something you really should look at because you've got the talent and you've got, clearly the smart to do it. And it really changed my thinking. But I've always liked football. I never fell in love with it, but I fell in love with what it could do for me.
Right.
Which is always the saying, right? It's not people who love it. They love what it can do for you.
First of all, did you end up going to the public high school, or which high school did you?
Private high school.
Private high school.
Yeah, I went to a private Catholic high school, which was a eye-opening experience for me because where I grew up, it was pretty much 50-50, black and white. A lot of kids came from, poor working class communities. It was, I'm trying to think, it was almost like maybe like a Lee Summit a little bit. Just like a mix of different people, different classes. And then to go to a school that was predominantly white and, pretty much, mostly upper class kids. I mean, I went to school with one of the daughters of Tom Monahan, who owned Domino's Pizza.
Right.
And so there were a lot of people who had, a lot of money and a lot of power and stature. So it was weird to be in that mix. But again, I learned how to deal with it. And it was, in the end, it was good to be exposed to religion. I didn't know anything about, that kind of faith at that point.
Right.
That kind of discipline that came from it. So it became a positive.
What was the social life, and what was that adjustment like from your previous life, where you mentioned it was so open and mixed?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much there. I mean, it was a mix of it, but I remember it's, as you said, child of the 70s, like I was just a naive kid, just enjoying life. And then once I started dating, the world kind of changed a little bit. And it changed as far as my parents being more, more willing to sit us down and talk about interracial dating. Obviously, I was a black kid. There were a lot of white girls, so you're going to have a lot of interaction in that way. And I remember vividly wanting to go to a dance with some friends when I was a sophomore, and my parents saying, hey, look, just so you know, not everybody loves the idea of a black kid showing up and dating a white girl, dating their white daughter. And my dad actually talked about an experience he had at Washington State when he went on a date with a young white woman and went to her house to have dinner. And she said the woman's dad was actually pretty nice to him and respectful, but the woman's mother was very almost like he brought HIV into the room,
right?
Trying to infect somebody, and he just remembered that so vividly. And so, I think my going through that experience kind of brought back some demons for them that we had to discuss and talk through. I remember going on that date, and everybody went to, one guy was driving 4 people around, 4 couples, and every house we went to, the parents would come out and, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. So-and-so's ready to come out. She's excited. And when we got to the girl I was going to go with, her parents weren't there. And I thought, well, this is interesting. She was really sweet to me and we became really good friends. But I think that opened my eyes to some of the things that I might face in that world. And I ended up dating and having girlfriends. But I even remember when I finished school that one of my ex-classmates had come up to me after I'd graduated and was talking about just the world we had lived in. And she said, when that school, there was a lot of racism going on that you didn't know about. And I said, really? I said, like what? And she said, well, when you were a senior, you were elected to be the homecoming king.
Right.
And I said, really? That's funny because I don't remember being the homecoming king. And she said, well, yeah, because when they did the votes, you won. And they didn't want to have a situation where you were going to go out there with this other girl. And so they changed it. And this guy who was a friend of mine, a white guy, and went out there. And she said, but that's how it was. They didn't want to have those kind of situations. They have to deal with those kind of situations. So they would just.
She's the public face of a girl that that maybe you weren't dating or anything.
Exactly.
You just they didn't want an interracial. Yeah.
So it was a bizarre twist there. But But again, I didn't know about that stuff.
Now, did that make you mad, or do you just accept it as
You know, it's funny you say that, because my reaction to it was, you know, kind of whatever. Like, it wasn't like, I think I've always been a moving forward type of person. Like, it's over. Whatever part of my life has happened is done and gone, so I'm on to the next thing. And that's always served me well. And so when I was told that, it wasn't like, oh my God, I could have been the homecoming king. It was like, well, I can't control it. It doesn't really affect me. I'm not there anymore. It's somebody else's problem. I felt like, for the most part, I was treated well there. I was supported. The teachers were all cool to me. I had great coaches, great friends. So I never had the situations that came up like that. I was never made aware of them.
right?
But looking back on it, again, I can see where, you know, if in the moment, if I'd been aware of it when I was school there, I'd have been upset.
Right.
But I kind of felt like, well, I got new challenges to deal with.
So, as you mentioned, your football coach sitting you down and talking about the scholarship opportunities, how did that whole process work for you? Because you end up at Wyoming.
Yeah, well, it worked pretty well, pretty quickly, because all the dreams I had in basketball, you know, they were taking longer because it was a smaller school and there's a lot of 6'2" guards out there.
Right.
Where I wasn't averaging 35 points a game. I think, you know, I was still trying to find a way to fit in with the varsity. But as a football player, I was like an honorable mention all-city player. As a sophomore, I was an all-city first-team player as a junior, and then going into my senior year, I was top 20 player in Michigan. Tom Lemming, who ran
right. Yeah, I remember that.
Highly respected guy.
Him, yeah.
He called me up and came out and did a thing with me, and I was the 7th best player in the state on his list. So I was making all these magazines I used to read, all these recruiting lists I used to see. All of a sudden, my name's in there,
right,
with these people, and people are writing articles about me. So, and I'm getting, you know, all of a sudden. And I'm getting phone calls, like serious phone calls, like people like Stanford, Indiana, Colorado, Michigan State, like all these schools are recruiting me pretty seriously. And so going into my senior year, I felt like those were my top 4 schools: Stanford,
right,
Michigan State, Indiana, and Colorado. And Michigan State, their head coach at the time was a guy named George Perlis. He didn't call me. My high school coach called me up in June of that year and said, I'm at Michigan State football camp. I need you to come up to talk to the coaches. I was like, okay. So I hop in the car with my twin brother and my younger brother. We go up there, find our way over to the football building, walk into the indoor practice facility. And there's like hundreds of kids in there, probably 500 kids in there, all sitting around waiting for George Perlis to talk to him. My coach calls me over to George Perlis and his defensive coordinator, Norm Parker, and Perlis says, you know what? I've coached Andre Rison. I've coached Carl Banks. I think you're in the same class as these guys. I want you to be a Michigan State Spartan. I want you to know right now that no matter what happens this year, if you get hurt, you miss a couple games, you have a scholarship opportunity to come to school here. So it was the first guy who actually said that. I was like, whoa. And he's saying it in front of all these kids.
Oh, wow.
Who would love to be sitting where I'm sitting with my brother's back here. And I'm like, okay. And then, the year goes on. The summer goes on. I go to a football camp that year. I'm doing a shuffle drill, and I ended up injuring my left knee. Ended up partially tearing the anterior cruciate ligament in my left knee. So I'm like, great. Like, I don't want to have surgery because it's my senior year. I'm going to play through this, get through the year, not tell anybody about it. First game of the year, I'm playing running back. I take a handoff. I go to the line of scrimmage. Guy rolls into my leg.
It's gone.
Now I'm like, okay, literally having to figure out how can I get healthy quickly enough to get back on the field? How can I not let people know, what's happened to me? It's not, I don't want people to know the severity of the injury. I'm playing hurt, so I'm limping around. I'm not looking as good on tape as I was.
So you continued it. The second one that you did, you didn't
went back out there, yeah.
So you knew it was really injured.
Yeah.
Wow.
I knew it was hurt. So I played my entire senior year with a torn knee injury, and all of a sudden, all those schools that were really high on me started to kind of fade. Like, I was still going to football games at Michigan State. They said, hey, whatever games you want to come to, you're more than welcome to come. Indiana was still calling me. But once it got down to actual, rubber meets the road time, where people were like, okay, we're going to have this kid come in. Let's look at his tape. Let's go watch him play basketball. Like, I was still like, kind of like trying to protect myself. I wasn't playing as hard. I couldn't be as explosive. So Stanford had a coach come out, did a home visit with me. He watched me play basketball. Then all of a sudden, he didn't want to take my calls anymore.
So you didn't tell anybody, hey, I'm playing a little compromised? Or,
no.
Do you regret that you did that?
Yeah, now I do. But back then, it's like you feel like you feel like you have so much weight on your shoulders, and people expect so much of you that to offer that up is taking a huge risk.
Right.
And so, I wish I would have had the courage to say, I'm kind of banged up here, and maybe they would have said, that's okay. We like you anyway. Let's take you. But I think the overall impression I left was that I just wasn't as good as I was the year before.
They thought you were, right.
Yeah. And so all these schools faded away, and Michigan State was the last one. And I remember trying to call the football office to talk to a coach who'd been recruiting me, and they wouldn't take the calls. I remember just sitting down and crying because I knew at that point, like, they just, I'm done. Like,
even though they said, even if you get injured.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what ended up happening was one of the coaches who was there in Perlis talked to me. This guy, Norm Parker, he called this coach out of Wyoming, this guy named Greg Brown, who was a defensive backs coach. And I was a safety that I was being recruited as a defensive back. And so Greg Brown called me up in early January. It was pretty close to the recruiting signing day. And by that point, I kind of knew, all right, all these big schools are off me. Mm-hmm. Some of these other schools that probably would have recruited me, like Northwestern or, trying to think of other schools who were in the mix there, like mid-major schools.
Right.
Like they,
Mid-American Conference.
Yeah, they'd all kind of like decided, all right, well, you're out of the mix. We've got other kids. I'm sort of like,
caught in between.
Both ways.
Yeah.
And so Greg Brown called me up and said, hey, I heard about you from Norm Parker. They're not going to take you. Would you want to come out to Wyoming and see what we have to offer? I just watched your tape. I think you're pretty talented. And I was like, sign me up. Like, like, where do I go? And he's like, well, we'll get you out here for a trip. We got some kids coming in next a couple weeks. And I flew out there, and Danny, I kid you not, it was like a blizzard. It was 10 feet of snow. Probably fell that day in Wyoming, and I met Coach Brown for the first time, met the head coach, Paul Roach, and they said what I wanted to hear. And we want you to be here. We think you have talent. And at that point, my whole mindset was, I don't care what happened. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. Anybody who doubted me, like, they're going to find out what they missed out on. And so I went to Wyoming.
I visited, I played golf at that campus a couple of years ago. My wife and I did a driving trip through Wyoming, and we went through all these beautiful places in Wyoming, but Wyoming has a juxtaposition of, you're going through these glorious mountain passes, and then you're just in this high desert. Yeah. And my impression was, all this beauty in this state, and they put the university right here?
Yeah.
That was my reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the mountains away 100 miles away, but I'm like, this ain't so sweet.
Yeah. What were they thinking? Yeah. Exactly what I thought. I couldn't even see the campus when I got there. It was covered in snow. I didn't know what anything looked like until I actually showed up for to actually play football there. So
that place is also at 72 something.
Yeah, it's high. It's
feet.
Higher than Denver.
I remember I hit my 6-iron like 220 yards, and somehow I'm like, oh, this is a different world.
Well, if you're walking that course, I bet you're probably feeling it too, because
so that must get you into some pretty good condition if you're playing football at that kind of altitude, didn't it?
It did. Well, unfortunately,
yes.
I went out and played. I didn't get my knee fixed.
Oh, you did not.
So I was still out there fooling around, thinking I'll be okay. And before I was supposed to go to training camp in my freshman year, I was playing basketball, and my knee gave out, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is not good. Like, it was literally 2 weeks before training camp began, so I had to call the coaches and say, look, I just tore my knee up. And they said, all right, well, that's fine. Just, go ahead. Come on out here. We'll have our doctor look at it. If you have to have surgery, we'll just go ahead and do it here. You're going to redshirt anyway, so it's not going to be
So you were going to redshirt.
Yeah. And so they were fine with that. got out there. Parents drove out with me, went through the surgery. And I remember vividly when I came out of surgery, I was watching some kind of documentary on old football players, guys who retired from the NFL, and it was like Larry Zonka and
Right.
I think Jim Brown might have been on there, and a bunch of old guys. But they were all talking about how beat up they were. Earl Campbell, and talking about just what they were having to go through to get out of bed. And I was thinking, for the first time, I was like, wow, maybe this could be my ending in this game. Like, this is a pretty physical game. It never dawned on me.
Right.
But then I sort of started thinking about what I was going through with my body already. And it just kind of planted that seed of, is this what I really want for myself? So I was kind of put that in the back of my mind, went through the year. Yeah, it was a fun year, went to the Holiday Bowl, played Oklahoma State with Barry Sanders, got a ring.
So you did have surgery.
I did have surgery, yeah. I had surgery. And then I came out for my spring drills the following spring, and I was in a backpedaling drill, made a cut, and my other knee gave out.
Wow.
And so now I'm thinking, this is really, this is the real test right here, because now they're talking about, well, we have to cut you the other one now and go through the same process of rehab. And back then the rehab it's kind of like an 8-month rehab. They put you in a cast for 6 weeks.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, let me process this. Went home. I came back the next year, didn't have the surgery, went through the season, just kind of playing on practice squad stuff, not really being involved in, traveling. And I think probably by the end of that year, I was like, I'm not playing football anymore. Like, I just feel like it's been a fun ride. I don't want to have to go through the surgery again. I don't think I would have come here if I'd been healthy. And there was no knock on Wyoming. I got some great friends from there, but I think I had put myself into a position, one, trying to prove to people I could play, trying to make up for what had happened, trying to grind through injuries, serious injuries, that it was just like, this is, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And it was I was watching Andrew Luck the other day talking about the end of his run there, and I really understood what he was talking about when your body is breaking down on you over and over and over again, and you're trying to just, I'd gotten so far removed from the person I was, the athlete I was, that I was just like, all I'm doing is trying to just stay healthy, or just trying to, make people think that I'm not as banged up as I actually am. My knees are killing. It's just like, it just really hit me. And I remember calling my dad up and saying, I think I want to leave school and transfer. And he was like, well, I didn't raise you to be a quitter. And so that's on the table now too.
Right. Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so now I'm like, well, all right. Yeah, I'm quitting. I'm leaving here. And my parents were splitting up too. So my mom told me, I had a great time to come back home, because the place you left is...
All right. So your parents had not really had visible signs of tension until you went off to college.
School, and then it just blew up.
Right.
And so she's like, you come back here, and it's just like, your dad just moved out. We didn't want to tell you this.
Right.
Like, I'm here. Like, she was finishing up her PhD, so she didn't have any money. And so it's like, you come back here, the support that you knew that you were used to having, it's not going to be here, so just know that. And so so I actually called some other people who I'd known, like from like Eastern Michigan, Mac schools, and said, hey, if I come here, I talked to Lloyd Carr, who I went to school with his kids, and he kind of was, they didn't recruit me hard, but he was kind of like always talking to me about what was happening. And I said, what if I walked on there? And I was just like, I was just kind of like all over the map. And then finally I just said, let me just go back to school. I'll figure it out. I'm not going to have surgery again.
And so back to Wyoming.
Back to Michigan.
So back to Michigan.
Right. Let me go back home
to
Michigan and leave. And so, I finished my year up at Wyoming, and then got in a car with a buddy of mine who was from Michigan. We drove back, and I never went back again.
But it sounds like through the process, you were able to get a finality that there wasn't maybe one moment where you like, man, it's over, and you're crying or whatever.
No, it wasn't. It was more like, One thing I do a lot of today, I do a lot of mentoring, and I'm involved with I'm trying to actually date more, and his foundation started a mentoring program I've been really heavily involved with. And I wish that I had a mentor back then. And I wish I had somebody who I could talk to, who I trusted, who could let me know, all right, if you do this, this will happen. This isn't that big of a deal. Everything was so dramatic in my life back then, because I didn't, again, my parents didn't have any experience in sports. They were always, even when I went to college, they were like, you don't have to do this. You can go to school on academic scholarship. You're smart enough. I was a 3.8 student. So it's they were never selling this as this is your only road. And for me, it was, I just didn't know how to navigate that world.
Right.
Once it was great when things were going great. And I think Andrew Luck probably had some of this too in his own life. But once things started getting really rocky, you have to decide how much you love it, because now you're giving a pound of flesh.
Right, exactly. And you said before it wasn't your most passionate sport even.
Exactly. It just came to me, and I rode the wave, and the wave crested really quickly.
Yeah.
And then it just came crashing down just as fast.
Good place to take our time out. We'll be back more with this fascinating conversation with Jeff Chadiha from NFL Network and Phase 2 After Playing Sports coming up next.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Looking for a truly unique escape from your normal entertainment or corporate team-building regimen? Stay tuned for an exclusive offer only for Reasonably Irreverent listeners. I'm excited to tell you about an extraordinary destination, the Exit Room, located in the heart of beautiful downtown Lee Summit. The Exit Room is a distinctive entertainment option that offers a cool alternative to the normal couples night out, family get-togethers, and corporate team-building events. The Exit Room is a one-of-a-kind boutique escape room catering to special occasions and corporate team-building events, and is unmatched in the Kansas City metro. With 5 individually designed and varied escape room adventures, your party or employees can unplug from their electronic world, interact with one another, match wits, and ultimately escape the humdrum of the ordinary. The Exit Room adventures cross decades and centuries and create fascinating fun. I know the owners well. They are local folks, their staff is warm and friendly, their lobby is inviting and beautiful, and their adventures are award-winning. Check online. There are over 1,000 reviews, and note that they are a rare 5-star ranked business. Visit their website and Facebook page, and any of my listeners who books online at theexitroomkc.com using the promo code ClinkScale19 gets 10% off any ticket purchase. The Exit Room in Lee Summit. Unplug, interact, and escape.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
I was duped, and I recommend you be next. For better or worse, the ultra-realistic impression of me sits now in my wife's office to spook her on a daily basis. So what is Doob? D-O-O-B. It's the keepsake of a lifetime, a 3D-generated, incredibly lifelike figurine. 66 cameras take an image at exactly the same moment in any pose, and state-of-the-art 3D technology transforms that into exact replicas of you, anyone you know or love, a pet, whomever is close to your heart. Create lifetime memories with a Doob. Visit their Facebook page at Doob 3D Kansas City, or better yet, see their incredible creations. Visit their location down on the plaza in the heart of it at 231 West 47th Street in KC Mo. Doob, be next. Sumner One is the company to make your office maximize efficiency. Their family of companies make up one of the largest independent dealers of office technology in the Midwest. They are proud to bring the best service and technology to top companies across the region. Sumner One can help your organization run more smoothly than ever. Sumner One printers, copiers, MFPs, managed print services, document management, infrastructure design, IT services, disaster recovery, and business continuity. Welcome to the one place where everything works. For more information, call Carl Little at 913-752-2256. We're back with Jeff Chadiha on Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. Each and every Friday, we talk to interesting people that you know and try to get you to know them a little bit better. And I think we've already done some of that with Jeff. So let's talk about writing, and we can take it back a little bit because you mentioned you were a good student and, eventually would become a writer. And even though you do a lot of broadcasting, you've never stopped writing. Was writing a passion of yours at all when you were younger?
It was. In a weird way, I didn't know that because when I was a kid, I used to have a slight stutter. And so I used to be very self-conscious about talking to people, talking in front of people. So writing was always...
That seems pretty stunning right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So writing was always my vessel. It was always my way of communicating with the world and kind of getting lost in my own little, imagination. And so I used to write stories when I was a kid. I'd write poems. I used to always read books. I would consume books. I used to love that little sheet of paper they'd give you when you were in school. You could check off whatever books you wanted to have and order them, and they come into your classroom.
We're kindred spirits. I read all the books, all the kids' books in my hometown library in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Okay. They ran out. Yeah. They had to get more.
Yeah, I feel it. But it never dawned on me, unlike sports where you always have turn on TV, you can see guys making a living doing this.
Mm-hmm, right.
As a writer, I'm thinking, well, okay, how do you make a living doing this? Like, aside from writing a book, like, what else can you do?
Right.
And so when I got into sports, I kind of took my academics for granted. Again, they came easy to me. I was a pretty good student.
Mm-hmm.
The fact I got into Stanford without having to be a football player, so that was actually I thought about going to school there when I was transferring, but I felt like sports was the dream and school was the work.
Right.
And then once I left Wyoming, I went through a period when I was at Michigan of trying to figure out what can I do that's going to, kind of move me and keep me passionate about something. So I tried business and I tried, pre-law. I tried a ton of different majors, none of which worked at all for me. And the way I'm built, I have to really care about what I'm doing. I just can't do something and just go devote 8-9 hours to it a day and then move on. It's just I'm not wired that way. And so when I was at Michigan, I was struggling with my personal life. My parents were divorced. I was struggling with not being an athlete anymore and all the identity that came from that. And so I was like, my grade point average was like 2.4 or something. And I was just like, this is really going south here.
Right.
And so I took a journalism class because I knew I could write.
Right.
And I felt, well, okay, at the very least, I know I can go in here and get an easy A out of this. And I took the class, and it was a news writing course, and I got an A. And the teacher, she was a TA, she was a student. She said, hey, look, you're pretty good at this. You may want to talk to the guy who runs the class because he has other classes that you may want to try. And I said, okay. And at that time, I was short on money because I was working part-time at the University of Michigan Hospital. So I was trying to find scholarship money. I had like an ACT scholarship because I had done pretty well on that test, but I wanted to get more. So I was like, maybe I can write my way into a scholarship. So I go to this teacher who's running the scholarship program, and I said, hey, look, I took your class in news writing. I want to get a scholarship. Can you help me out here? And he's like, what's your name? And I said, it's Jeff Chadiha. He's like, oh, I remember seeing some of your work. Yeah, you are pretty good. And it was the first time somebody had said that to me,
right,
where I think I could actually hear it. I'm sure I'd heard it before in terms of like academic stuff, but I didn't understand how low I was in terms of self-confidence and self-esteem. And him just saying that made me think, well, maybe this could be the ticket. Maybe this could be the way I get back into doing this. And his name was Don Kubit. And he actually had a background in sports. He'd been an athlete and he'd been a writer. And he was just like, hey, look, if you want to do a scholarship, like fill out this form, come on back. But you can also help me out with something else because there's a couple of things I'm doing with the faculty here. We need a student representative. Would you mind doing this? And so I started doing this. And I took his class as well, which I think was a magazine writing class. And we started to become close. We would always talk to me. He'd always give me advice. And I think from that point forward, every semester I had a class from him. He had an independent study class with a bunch of, Mitch Albom came and spoke at that one.
Right.
We did something else together. And And keep in mind, this is like, I was only in Michigan for like 3 years. So
right.
My first class with him was the second year.
Right.
So I had 4 semesters to make this work. And so by the end of my going toward my last semester there, I was talking to him about, hey, can I really do this for a living? He's like, yeah. And I said, well, where would I start? Because all I have is the coursework I've done with you. I haven't worked for the school paper. I haven't done anything in the school TV station. Like, all I have is my classwork. And he's like, well, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make some calls. There are some career conferences coming up, like, some job fairs coming in. Why don't you go over there and see what happens? I went over to the job fair, or I ran to, again, my first move was to go to whatever, the Anderson Consulting or Ford Motor Company, a sales job. And then over in the corner was the Ann Arbor News. Right. With some old guys standing there. And I went up to the guy. His name was Dave Bishop. He also taught at the university. I didn't know that. And I said, hey, look, I'm from the area. I'm kind of curious about writing for a newspaper. Like, what kind of opportunities would someone like myself have? I have a background in sports. Yeah, I've done I showed him my school papers. Right. That's all I had to offer him. And he's like, well, this is interesting. Like, it's good that you're a local kid. It's good that you played sports. You're not ready for a full-time job here. And we've already hired our interns for the summer, but, if you come back, you can talk to the publisher and maybe he can give you some insights. But I think, there's some, it's worth you having a conversation with him. Mm-hmm. Came back the next day and talked to the publisher, and he told me the same thing about the job opportunities. But he said, look, you being an ex-athlete, you being from the area, that matters to me. I think that's a plus for you. I tell you what, why don't you come in next week? We'll give you a job covering high school sports for us. We have stringers who go to the games locally and do basketball, whatever. And he said, you can do that. We'll pay you, I don't know what it was, $50 a story or something like that. And we'll see where it goes. I go in to meet the sports editor. We talk about what I'm going to do. And there's this big fat black guy sitting across the way named Jason Whitlock, who is who had been working at the paper covering the Fab Five at the time. And he starts talking to me about how his career had gone, how he played football, and he started off at the bottom and was rising, trying to work his way up. It's a good opportunity for me. And so I went out and did it. I did enough to where they said, hey, you can be an intern for us, and we'll split the internship between news and sports. So I did that, and, I was hanging out with Whitlock and some editors and learning some stuff about news. And then I guess what I realized at that time was, which I didn't realize when I was playing football, was that this was my opportunity to really make good. And it was an opportunity for me to make the most of my situation. I can't just glide through here and do what I want to do. I got to come in here and grind. Right. So I think I took some of the things I learned from my football experience as far as just thinking it would all be great no matter what happened. And I realized, don't take anything for granted. Make the most of every opportunity. So I was pitching stories and I was throwing out projects and I wanted to go along with this. And so they saw me as this kid who was really energized and motivated and creative. And at the end of that summer, they gave me a job as the police reporter. And I was like, I didn't know anything about police. I didn't know anything about news outside of what I'd done. Which was, going to small time stuff. But what they did, and I've been forever grateful for it. They said, we know you don't have a lot of experience in this. But what we're going to do is for the first couple months of this job, you're going to follow around the education reporter for a little bit. You're going to follow around the city council reporter. You're going to go out with the police reporter. You're going to go out with the county government reporter, and you're going to spend time with all these people. And you're going to learn how to do this job. And so by the time you get ready to cover the police, you're going to understand how the news world works. You're going to be on the copy desk for a little bit. And to this day, I always tell young people, it's like, if you can find a place that will do that for you, who will invest in you, who will see the good in you, but also understand where you're at. Right. It's, I still get moved by it because I think about they didn't have to do that, and as it worked out, I actually wound up covering police. And first story I got a call on the scanner, and somebody said, go out to Chelsea, small town outside of Ann Arbor, kind of like what a Gardner would be here. And, there's something happened out there. I go out there, police tape everywhere, kids screaming and running, cop cars. And a teacher in that school district had walked into a meeting and shot his superintendent and shot his principal.
Wow.
And so here I am, this 22-year-old kid, like, who was thinking about being a sports reporter at one point a few months earlier, and thinking about being a pro athlete 3 years earlier. And now I'm like doing real life stuff. And I had to go through and do interviews and try to make sense of it. Second story I got a week later, scanner rings again. Hey, there was a death at a local school. Can you go check it out? Go out there. I find out that this 7-year-old girl was playing out behind her school for recess, after school. And the slide she was playing on faced away from the school, and it was cold. It was like December, January, and she had gone on the slide, and her drawstrings on her slide had gotten stuck on the slide, and so she basically hung herself hanging on the slide. Like, she just hung there and then suffocated to death. And so I had to go knock on the door of her family, and that day, the same day the girl died, and talk to them. And I remember feeling like a jerk walking up to the door and knocking and saying, "Hey, I'm Jeff Chadiha with the Ann Arbor News. Mind if I come in and talk about your daughter? I'm sorry about what happened." And the lady, I'll never forget, she was just like, "Hey, it's fine. I understand you have a job to do. Come on in. We have some friends and family here talking about the girl." And it turns out she didn't just die, but the woman couldn't have kids. They had adopted her from China.
Oh, wow.
It was like a double blow. And I'm sitting there in a room like this, listening to her talk not about how upset they were, not about how angry they were with, the school for not taking care of their kid. They just talked about having her for 5 years, how much that meant to them. And I sat there thinking I was going to have to take notes or, turn on a tape recorder, and I just didn't do anything. I just listened to them the whole time. And it was a good lesson again for me, because it showed me how important that job was, that you are really coming into people's lives at really difficult times and trying to help them make sense of things. So the responsibility is huge. But two, it's like, you don't have to always be Mr. Reporter, cub reporter.
Sometimes just listening.
Listening. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do the job. And so I remember going back and writing the story, and I didn't have to think about, what she said, because I remembered it all. And so from that point forward, it's just kind of those experiences, like those two stories starting out, the mentoring, like even being around Whitlock, like all those things shaped me in a way to help me understand the importance of the opportunity, the significance of the role I was playing in people's lives. It just it really helped me become a good journalist at a really early age.
Give me a chronology in not rapid fire form, but how you got back into sports and the steps you took.
Yeah, well,
to where we are today.
That's where Jason comes into it. He was a very ambitious, him, he was a very ambitious, hungry reporter at the time, and he had made his name covering the Fab Five, and we were both trying to find jobs at bigger papers, and so we actually took a trip to Atlanta to a NABJ conference that year. I always tell people I had a little Ford Escort that we drove down there.
I know that you drove. I know that for sure.
Yeah, I drove. Well, I always tell people that I think whoever passed us on the highway must have thought my airbag had exploded. It was just this 300-pound man in the passenger seat, probably weighing my car down. The suspension was never the same. But we drove down there. He wound up making a couple contacts, and I think he touched base with the Kansas City Star when he was there, and they ended up hiring him to become the columnist here. And so when he left, he said, "Look, man, you should stay here." At that point, I was looking at news jobs, and I was getting opportunities for that. And he said, "Stay here. I'm going to leave. This is a great platform for you to get noticed, and it'll work out for you." So I moved into sports when he left.
Okay. And
I covered Michigan's football and basketball team for a couple years until 96, from 94 to 96. And then I was always taking my clips, back in the day before email and everything else, and I would just write down places I would want to work at or bigger papers and send the stuff out and see what would happen. And sometimes people would write back and say, "We like it." Sometimes you get like a form letter that would just say, "Whatever, thanks for sending this. We'll keep it on file." Well, I got a call from a sports editor in San Francisco named Glenn Schwartz, who was the editor of the Examiner newspaper, which I'd never heard of before. And he said, "Hey, look, you sent some stuff here. And I think I sent it to the Chronicle, not the Examiner. Somebody wound up with him. And he said, I saw your stuff. We have an opportunity out here because the Oakland Raiders are moving from LA back to Oakland.
Okay.
And so we're looking for a young guy to come out and cover the team. And by that point, I was kind of at a crossroad with journalism because I'd been doing it for 3 or 4 years. And I was thinking, am I really going to make this work? Because I haven't found an opportunity I like that makes me want to leave here. And what kind of money am I going to make? And I have friends who are going off into jobs with lavish careers, and they're already taken off. And so I was thinking about going to law school. And so I was studying for the LSAT when Glenn called me up. And I said, well, I'll come out there and I'll take a visit and check it out. Went out there and saw it. It was beautiful. Like, I liked the paper. I liked him. Liked the job. But I said, God, I'm already so far down the road here with law school. Maybe I should see where this leads. And so I was supposed to take the LSAT on a Monday. And a friend of mine who I was living with was a medical student. He was graduating and having a party on Sunday night. So I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the party. And if I'm responsible enough to get out of there at a decent time and get some sleep, I'll get up and take the LSAT and I'll go to law school. And if I end up staying late and I can't get up early to take this test, I'm going to go to San Francisco. See what happens. Got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's where it went. It was just sort of like.
But also, you must have realized that if you decided at midnight that you were going to go deep, that you must have really wanted to be a writer.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It was just like there was no what's Martin Luther King's famous line that. Faith is taking the step when you can't see the stairwell. That's how I was feeling. It wasn't like a great paying job for California, and the paper was the smaller of the two papers.
Right,
but it was an opportunity, and it was something I think I felt like, yeah, you're right. Deep in my heart, I felt like I can be good at this.
How about the next step? Was TSPN? Was it not? Or?
No, it was Sports Illustrated.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
But a quick story as to how that happened. When I got to the Examiner and started covering the Raiders, I didn't know much about covering pro football. I just knew it was a good opportunity. And what I would do is I would get up every morning and look at the press guide and try to figure out, I would read all the bios. And I would try to figure out what do I have in common with some of the people in here that I could actually have a conversation and start creating sources. And so there was this one guy who I met at a breakfast before a game, because I would always get to the game early and try to meet these people. And I sat down with him, and he went to Ohio State, and he played in the 60s at Ohio State. And I said, man, it's like we started talking about Ohio State, Michigan, and what he'd been through and blah, blah, blah. And then later that year, I would see him every now and then. We talk some more. And then by the end of the season, the coach, Mike White, was on the outs with the Raiders, and people were talking about him getting fired. And finally, I went to this guy and said, hey, look, everybody's talking about this guy getting fired. Like, you know anything about this? And he said, let me tell you something. I take Al, his Diet Coke every morning, and we sit around and talk. And the other day, he said, Mike White's done. And I'm like, well, can I use that? And he's like, yeah, for sure. And he's like, I said, are you certain about this? Because I didn't know him that well.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, you can run with it. Like, Al didn't talk to anybody except me. And so I'm like, all right. So I, gave my story, wrote the story, gave it to my boss, and he's like, you sure about this? And I said, I'm pretty sure, about 95%. He's like, all right. Went home for Christmas, called my boss, and he was like, he got fired. Like, oh, I was blamed. He got fired. We broke the story. And that guy called me the next day, and he's like, hey, you know why I gave you that story? And I said, no, why? He said, because you're the only guy on this whole beat who talks to me like I'm a real person. He's like, you're the only person who actually took the time to sit down and talk to me. Everybody else just walks by, acts like I don't matter. And from that point, that guy gave me like 3 huge stories like the rest of that year, and I started to make my name as a beat writer. And then Sports Illustrated called. They found out about me because Mike Silver, who's been a good friend of mine for about 20 years now, he was living in the Bay Area, and he would always say, man, you're breaking everything on this beat, because nobody broke stories on the Raiders. And so I guess he had told his bosses about me, and they called, and I was in Puerto Rico on a vacation, and I was checking my messages from a payphone. Like I was in like some remote part of the country,
right.
like
right.
surrounded by chickens and stray dogs. And listen, I'm like, Sports Illustrated just called me. And the guy said, yeah, we want to have you come out and take an interview and talk about having a job. And I said, you know what? I called the guy back and said, I don't want to be like a fact checker, or I don't want to be like a reporter. And he's like, no, we want you to be a writer. And I was like, you serious? And he's like, yeah, we want you to come out. Silver told us about you. We've seen your stuff. We think you're pretty good. And that was 2000. That was like, it was like February of 2000, April 2000. I flew out there and they made me an offer, and I was writing for Sports Illustrated.
So now you're at Sports Illustrated, which I won't say still then, but
it was the pinnacle.
It was the pinnacle still, and at that point in time. But then ESPN was indeed at its heights when you went there too.
Yeah, it was, and that came about because I was living in New York. I moved to New York to be closer to the office. And I started doing local TV. Jim Rome actually was the first to have me do TV. He had me fly out to L.A. to do a show he was doing called Rome is Burning. And then ESPN started Cold Pizza.
Right.
And they changed the format a little bit to make it less of a variety show and more of a news show. So they were having different reporters come on. I was one of those reporters, Chris Broussard, Pat Forty, a lot of people. Ken Rosenthal got his big break on TV doing that. And so I started talking to the guy who produced the show about, the world's changing here. And I can see that being a writer isn't just enough anymore, and that digital is taking over.
Right.
Is there an opportunity for me at ESPN? And he said, oh, yeah, for sure, man. Just come on over. I'll set it up. We'll have you up, and we'll talk to some people. And I totally am honest about the fact that, SI to me was a dream job because, the world we live in, our generation, is that SI was everything.
The thing.
And so to have them want me.
My whole bedroom wall with Sports Illustrated pictures. Yeah.
And so when ESPN came calling, I was certainly honored, but it didn't have the same, oh my God, I have arrived. And it was more of, this is the world is changing. And you have to start thinking about how you're going to adapt to that. Mm-hmm. And so I started doing TV, and it was an adjustment. It was hard to kind of go from being a writer to being a TV presence and trying to find your voice. I started off doing First Take with Skip Bayless. They had a rotation of people, myself, Jamel Hill, Howard Bryant, Stephen A. Smith, I think, was gone at that point. Patrick McEnroe was somebody to have on, a friend of mine, Damon Hack, who's with the Golf Channel now.
Right, yep.
And so we would all come on and do our little thing, and they were trying to figure out the show. And eventually I wanted to do E60, which had started out the same year I showed up. And I talked to their producers, and they said, look, just so you know, we think you can do this because, you've got a good voice, you got a good presence, you obviously know how to write and report, but we can't have you do that show and this show. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, because the look of that show,
right, exactly,
doesn't really fit what we want to do here.
Right.
And so I had to make a choice then. And again, it was a tougher choice because it meant less money. The way they structure their contracts, I wouldn't be on as much. But for me, I felt like I was going to do really high quality work. So moving in that direction really helped me out in terms of my career because I was able to continue to do the kind of work I'd been doing at Sports Illustrated as far as interviewing and everything else. But I was also able to have a lot of impact in what I was doing. It wasn't just screaming and yelling on TV and trying to have the hot take. It was, hey, you did something I remember. And that really meant a lot to me.
And eventually to NFL Network, obviously. Is that in any way for somebody who had worked at Sports Illustrated, had wanted the gravitas of E60 to work for a league? Was that a difficult decision for you?
I think 10 years earlier it would have been more difficult. It wasn't hard in the sense of, and this is it's not a funny story because it's affected a lot of people, but as I was going into after my second contract was done at ESPN, we went to them and talked about, okay, what we're going to do going forward. E60 had not become as prominent as it is now. When it first started out, they really took a lot of heat because it was really expensive to do. It was also not on as much. And so a lot of the big bosses at ESPN didn't respect it in the same way that they do now. And so it was considered a part-time gig. And so I was doing that. I was doing the writing on ESPN, and there weren't really a lot of shows I could really get into because of the E60, belief of, hey, you have to be more, have more gravitas in what you do. And so we talked to them about a contract in, I think it was January of 2015, and my deal was up in May. And we said, hey, this is what we're thinking. And they said, well, we're going to give you a 2-year deal for pretty much the same money I was making.
Right.
With like a $5,000 bump, basically the same money. And I said, well, okay, well, this is not really a
what I was thinking.
Sign. And at that point, we had talked to the NFL Network a couple years earlier when I was up, and they had been really excited about having me. And so their boss at that time, this guy Eric Weinberger, had called my agent and said, look, we missed out the first time. We're getting him this time. And so they offered like twice as many years, twice as much money. And it was just like, okay, this is a lot more.
This is what I was thinking about.
Yeah. But I was sort of, and what they wanted to do the kind of storytelling that I was doing at E60. So it really wasn't like to your point, it really wasn't a tremendous change in what I was doing. I was just going to be doing it for a different employer. Right. And ESPN they were having their own issues. And what I found out when I actually signed my deal to go to NFL Network, the next day it was announced ESPN is having to cut $250 million from the budget this year and $300 million the next year. And I was like, oh my God, I've literally just missed the bullet.
Right. Yeah. Good deal. That is a good deal. Your personal life as an adult, you've been married a couple of times. You have a child. Mm-hmm. How would you feel like your career and your personal life is mixed?
I think I've been very lucky to do what I've wanted to do in this business and to live where I wanted to live. Like every time I've moved up in this job, I've always felt like the best part of it is that I can live where I want to live. I mean, the money comes and goes, but to be able to have the freedom to determine, your location, your home base has been essential. Having a 6-year-old kid now, it's even more important because living here, I was able to make the choice of being someplace where I can, move around the country pretty easily. Doing what I do, I get to pick and choose when I come and go, aside from actual Sundays when I have to be at games during the fall. And so I've been really lucky that I've never had to make that choice of saying I have to go live in Miami now to make a living, or I have to go to Nashville to make a living. And one reason I had a kid so late in life was because I didn't want to ever have to make that choice when I was younger. I didn't want to have to be bouncing my family all over the world for my needs. I wanted to be 100% focused on what they needed. And I've been able to do that here.
What's it like having a son of 6 now in your life? And, obviously you're sharing parenting. What kind of challenges did that bring? And what kind of gratification are you getting out of the decision you made to have a child later in life?
Well, and everybody has their own way of doing it. For me, I look back, I was mature enough to handle having a kid when I was younger. I just didn't want to do it. And now that I'm older, I appreciate knowing myself better. Like I've had to go through my own transformation because of my parents' divorce, because of the college experience, sports experience. There were a lot of things that I didn't deal with very well when I was younger that I realized, going through therapy, I worked through a lot of that stuff. Going through just life in general, learning how to be the man I am today and learning how to appreciate that. I think when I was younger, I thought success meant making a lot of money, having a lot of stature, accomplishing a lot of stuff. And now I realize it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's when I see my son happy, that means, I'm successful. When I see my girlfriend, working at things and feeling secure with where we're living, what we're doing, and knowing she can rely on me, that makes me feel successful. It's like, so there are things that I'm able to appreciate now that I'm a parent with him, and having gone through a couple of divorces and knowing what tough times are like, that, he hasn't really been affected by that. Like he's a happy kid and he feels good he's proud of his dad. So that makes me feel there's nothing I've done before this point that makes me feel as good as that makes me feel.
You think you got a little athlete on your hands, or?
Yeah, he's a big kid. He's a big kid. He's like 4'6" right now. He's as big as a fourth grader. He's in first grade, and he's into it, and he likes talking about it. We watch sports, but one thing I've realized with him that I learned from my parents, bring it full circle, is that I don't push it on him. When we go out and play sports, we got a hoop out here in the driveway. You go and play basketball, and I'll be like, hey, let me show you this move. Let me show you this. Let me show you how to make a layup. And he'll be like, well, can we just play? And I'm like, sure, we can do that too. But he wants to show me the stuff that he learned from someplace else. So I know it's important for him to be able to let me see how he's developing, but he loves it. And I want him to, when I watch him play sports now, I see the same things I learned when I was his age, which is, if he was playing a kid across the street the other day and he was getting beat, and he was like, I want to go work on this. Let's go. How can I get better at this?
So now he came to you.
Yeah,
he came to you.
Exactly.
It seems like you feel like you're in a good place right now.
I do. And when I came to Kansas City, it was late 2005, 2006, and a lot of it was my first marriage, and I just felt like I'd always liked coming through here when I was working and covering the Raiders, and I always felt a sense of peace when I was here. And so it's a good place to start in terms of how I feel about today. Like, I used to want to have a lot of control over my life. I think I could have so much control over what happened and what it did. I could dictate a lot of stuff. Now I'm more at peace with the fact that if I have good people around me, if I'm healthy, if I have a passion in life, if have a spiritual base, like those things are what really make me feel good. So it's like I have all those things. I don't have to worry about, going out and trying to prove to people like I did in college, like, hey, look what I am. Like, I know who I am now, and I know that the people around me can see that too.
Thanks for sharing your story. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.